Hello and welcome. I am live from Pellam's Wasteland, and today I have another episode of Pellam's Wasteland Reads for you all. This time covering four books by Naguib Mahfouz, which I hope that is at least close to the pronunciation. But Naguib Mahfouz was an Egyptian writer, won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and has written a number of things. Some of them essentially with a contemporary setting when they were published, but these are all historical fictions about ancient Egypt. Um, Two of these I had read before, and so they were rereads, and two of these were new to me. And the four books are Khufu's Wisdom, Rhadopis of Nubia, Thebes at War, and Akhenaten Dweller in Truth. Those first three, I think, were all published fairly early in his career. Khufu's Wisdom, Rhadopis of Nubia, and Thebes at War. And then Akhenaten was published fairly late in his career, after having written a number of other things in between, but sort of returning to this idea of ancient pharaonic Egypt, and writing this really fascinating historical fiction about an interesting character from history. So let's start with those first three, which I think there is a one volume collection of those three in particular, um, and that may have been part of finding those three for me. So if you're interested, that is an option also. But they're all fairly short, 250 pages. Maybe Akhenaten is a little shorter than that. Um, but yeah. So Khufu's Wisdom is a story about a young man who is essentially prophesied to supplant the dynasty of Khufu, who, if you remember, the Great Pyramid is Khufu's Great Pyramid, because he had it built as a tomb for himself. Um, Rhadopis of Nubia, the titular Rhadopis, is a courtesan in Egypt, and she ends up beguiling the pharaoh and coming to have a uh, infatuated and destructive relationship between the two of them that is the sort of core of the story. And then Thebes at War is about the Hyksos, this invasion, this conquest of chunks of Egypt by the Hyksos or Hyksos, I don't know how you pronounce them, who take over more and more of Egypt, and then eventually there is the war, the Thebes at war to reconquer Egypt, reconquer the Nile, and send the Hyksos back to their sort of desert lands and all that sort of stuff. And all three of these are pretty good. I enjoyed them a lot. There's an interesting um, one of the kind of themes running through these stories is this idea of kind of ironic fate and twists of circumstance and all of that sort of stuff, and this idea that, for instance, the first book, Khufu's Wisdom, is all about this young man, Jedef. I hope that is also close to the pronunciation. Who he is prophesied at birth to supplant the dynasty, and his father is killed, and his mother ends up being driven into exile, and his her maid, her serving girl, ends up taking the child and raising him as her own, and he kind of ascends through the ranks and is raised as a foster child of one of the important pharaonic officials, and ends up gaining notice and of the other officials, and becoming a kind of major player in the sort of pharaonic court politics and all that sort of stuff. And this idea of the way that in classic fashion, much like a story about Oedipus or Perseus or any of those types of stories about the ironic fulfillment of fate, there is this quality of the way in which the kind of human ambition to overturn the sort of fated outcome of the grand shape of history ends up in its own way fulfilling that fated outcome in a fun and clever and interesting way, which is, I think, conceptually fairly similar to Rhadopis of Nubia, which is, as I said, it's about this doomed love affair Pharaoh, who is a um, great warrior and a leader, but is something of a flawed administrator and has these sort of dreams of wresting back power from the priests, but is unsubtle in his processes. And Rhadopis of Nubia is the most beautiful woman anyone has ever seen and is lovely and immediately falls in love with Pharaoh and is the kind of instigator of this period of decadence that ends up causing societal collapse. Basically, this idea of the kind of strange twists of fate already in play here as well. This the way that the fulfillment of the desires of the people involved ends up bringing about their downfall and all of that sort of stuff. Perhaps less kind of explicitly prophesied than in Khufu's wisdom, but still a similar concept of the kind of ironic fulfillment of desires and goals and all that sort of stuff. And then Thebes at War, similarly, is a story that ends up being, in the great majority, about Amos, the grandson of the pharaoh that we start the story with, who is attempting to reconquer Egypt, has fallen madly in love with the princess of the Hyksos, and is, of course, called upon by duty to wage war against her people and to destroy um, their political power and all that sort of stuff, but is infatuated with her and sort of um, unable to come clean about that to the people around him and all that. And this, the struggle between desire and duty is a major thing here, as well as a very, I think, a very clear narrativization of colonialism, right? The Hyksos invasion becomes symbolic of the various colonial powers carving up Egypt and also, I guess, the rest of the Middle East um, at various times in the 19th and 20th centuries. And there's a fair bit about that, and that's, I think, part of the kind of uh, rousing excitement of the this kind of anti-colonialist um, vision of history, as well as of the kind of modernity, right? The idea that um, historical fiction is not just about the period when things are set, but is also about the world around us today and all that sort of stuff. So that's a fun element of Thebes at War. And all three of these, I think, are pretty good, but none of them are as good as Akhenaten, which I think is really, really good. I had read it years ago, and rereading it, I was really just struck once again by just how good this particular story is. The um, the history of Akhenaten is that he was a pharaoh who um, initiated this attempt at essentially a monotheistic reformation of Egypt. He changed his name to Akhenaten in honor of the god Aten of the sun, and first attempted to kind of develop the religion of Aten, and then eventually outlawed all of the other traditional polytheistic religious practices in order to attempt to make everything Aten. And then things fell apart, and eventually he was deposed, and his young brother Tutankhamun, or King Tut, was put on the throne, and he became the next pharaoh. And all of this Aten stuff was sort of left to die out, and didn't wasn't a successful transformation of Egypt's culture or anything like that. And so the story of Akhenaten is about a young man in the aftermath of all of these events, who has been trained as a scribe, and is intelligent, and is sort of searching for a purpose in life, and decides that what he wants to do is to understand this period of the Akhenaten regime. And so the basically all of the chapters of the book, except for the very first one, are him going to various historical, or I guess I would say historically extrapolated figures. A number of these um, figures are, I think, not necessarily provable to have existed, but somebody would have had to, take that role, right? Some of the kind of like the figures, although maybe they do really appear in the records of the period. I don't know. I'm not an Egyptologist, quite frankly. Um, but at the very least, they are sort of believable portraits of roles that would be necessary in the pharaonic court and all of that sort of stuff. Um, and Maramoon is going around and interviewing all of these people, and asking them, essentially putting together an oral history of the Akhenaten regime, attempting to understand um, not just what happened, but how all these things happened. And so a major running theme in this story is the way that all these characters have different explanations for the things that happened, different perspectives on characters. We see a number of events multiple times, and sometimes we will see, like, from one character's perspective early on in the story, we might see for instance, the consequences of an event that we don't learn about until later on in the book, because the original kind of instigating crisis wasn't ever seen by the first character, and so they only saw the kind of aftermath, the consequences. So in particular, there's a fair bit about Akhenaten himself when he is still a young man. He's the younger brother when he is still named Amenhotep, and his older brother gets sick and dies, and it kind of instigates this religious crisis. And we don't really find out very much of the kind of personality of this event until much later in the story, after we have heard the kind of dynastic details. And so there's a really interesting quality of the kind of strangeness and the difficulty of understanding history presented in here. The way that we have the kind of bare bones events told to us early on, without really understanding the way that it shapes the personalities involved, until later on we are hearing from someone who possesses the kind of psychological astuteness and the position to understand more readily what happened there, and why this is a very kind of critical instigating event, a crisis that comes to shape the rest of the events in this story, which is really fun. It's a very clever use of kind of character positions and voice in literature. And it's great. It's great. Akhenaten, really great book. If you're only going to read one of these four books, make it that one, because I think that one is the best. It's a wonderful, uh, complex and layered story about these wonderfully realized historical figures, and these other figures kind of attempting to reckon with their own existence and the existence of other people, and what sort of events they have lived through and all that sort of stuff in a way that is really, really good. So, yeah. And, pretty cool as far as the sort of flavor of ancient Egyptian history as well, if you are into that. So yeah, check out all four of these. Check out Akhenaten in particular if if you only have the time for one. I would say check out that one. But aside from that, that is going to be it for me for today. So let me know in the comments down below if you have read any of these books or any other things that are kind of similar that you're interested in or anything like that. Let me know. Otherwise, I've been live from Pellam's Wasteland, and I will see you next time. Take care, everybody.